Hi, everybody. This is the first in what's going to be a series of these little video lectures I'm going to send you between classes to cover things we don't get to in class and to fill in some gaps. Um, Today, I want to talk about the cosmological argument. You read a cosmological argument if you did your homework and summarized Aquinas for me. I got a lot of those in my emails, so nice job. Um, we're going to talk about Aquinas in particular in a minute, but I want to start by putting this in context and explaining not only what it says, but what it's not saying. There are a lot of different versions of cosmological arguments. They're all what they have in common. The essential feature of a cosmological argument is that it's an attempt to prove the existence of God, first off, and we really mean prove. They're trying to prove something here by arguing that if God didn't exist, we wouldn't have an explanation of the universe around us. Now, that can mean a lot of different things, and we'll see more than these two. It can mean more than these two things, but most cosmological arguments fall into one of two categories. One, first cause arguments. That's what you have in Aquinas. A first cause argument is an attempt to say that in a world of cause and effect, if you trace back the causes and effects far enough into the past, you will and have to logically hit a first one. If you have an argument to that effect, you have a first cause argument. Next time, you're going to see something a little different. Your Samuel Clarke reading for next time is going to be a contingency argument. Contingency. I'm going to explain that one a little more. Contingency and necessity. Necessity is something that has to be the case. A necessary truth, for instance, is something that not only is true, but has to be true. Not all truths are like that. Most truths are contingent truths. It's the other word on the board. Contingency is something that might be otherwise. So, 2 plus 2 is 4. Necessary. Because it's not only true, it's the kind of thing that you can't make false. And no one else can make it false either. A contingent truth is you and I are contingent things. If you might not have existed, if your parents hadn't met, then you wouldn't exist. If things had happened a little differently on certain days, then other things might have happened on other days, and you might not be here. That makes you a contingent thing. Contingency arguments start with that fact about the universe and ask for an explanation of it. Why is it, contingency arguments ask, that you and I are here at all? Now, you can mean that in a causal way. You can mean explain where I came from, well, my mother made me. Or you could mean, might I not have been here and am I serving some purpose? Or is my existence in some deeper way necessary? Did something choose this grand scheme for me? If you ask that kind of question, you are in the domain of the contingency argument. So not all explanations of the universe are cause and effect explanations. We're going to look at one of those. They work very differently than Aquinas' argument. But Aquinas is not giving you an argument like that, at least not in the second way. He is giving you a first cause argument. So, how is his argument supposed to work? First off, before we get into his argument at all, I want to talk about, because we haven't looked at one yet, I want to look at what argument means in philosophy. An argument is an attempt to establish a conclusion. And it consists of two parts. It consists of premises, one premise or many and a conclusion that you're trying to prove with those premises. Now, when you look at an argument, you're looking at least two things. You're looking to see whether the argument is what we call valid. A valid argument is one like this. I'm going to give you one. All humans are mortal. Socrates is human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. These two lines are premises. This is a conclusion. The conclusion is, if you look at this argument, if the premises are true, the conclusion follows from them not probably, not maybe, not we think so but we'll have to check. It follows necessarily from its premises. If you have an argument like that, we call it valid. A valid argument is a matter not of whether what the argument says is true or false. It's a matter of the connections between the ideas in the argument. So if the premises are connected to the conclusion in a generally logical way like this, such that if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true, we call that a valid argument. Now, you can have a valid argument even if everything you say is false. All dogs are cats. All cats are zebras. Therefore, all dogs are zebras is a valid argument. It's valid because all that the word valid means is that the premises entail the conclusion logically. They're connected in the right way. So an argument can be valid even if everything it says is wrong. But a good argument is not going to do that. A good argument is going to be valid and say true things. You can get that problem in reverse. You can have an argument that says a lot of true things that aren't related in the right way. Barack Obama is president, therefore 2 + 2 is 4. Both of those things are true, but the second thing has nothing to do with the first one. So that argument is not valid, even if everything it said was true. A good argument should have both. A proof, in our sense of the word proof in philosophy, should be both valid, one, and two, everything it says should be true. Both of those are sometimes hard to tell on. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether an argument is valid, whether it's logically connected in the right way such that it does entail its conclusion. We might have to think about it for a while. And we might, in reverse, have a situation where we know that the argument is valid and we think its premises are true, but we don't know that its premises are true. So we have to look at its premises and see if we can prove them. See if we can have an argument for the parts of our argument. So arguments in philosophy are complicated. When I ask you, say in a homework assignment, what Aquinas' argument for so-and-so is, I'm not going to be just asking you for his conclusion. And conclusion is easy. God exists is going to be his conclusion. But how you get there is where everything that counts happens. Okay, so how do you establish your conclusion? Textbooks. Some of you emailed me to tell me that they had the 6th edition in the bookstore. Totally fine. Your page numbers might be different, but I believe every reading in this book is also in the 6th edition. So if you're reading different page numbers, that's totally okay. Just make sure you're finding the right reading. It should be able to find it by title. And if you're not sure, ask me. I am on page 165 of the 7th edition, but Thomas Aquinas in the second way. Now, starting here, I gave you one of the 5 ways, quote unquote. 5 ways. If you read the whole thing, I only assigned you the little piece of it, but if you read the whole passage, you'll know what the 5 ways are. The 5 ways are Aquinas' 5 Ways to prove that God exists. Um, the first and second look a lot alike. I could have assigned you the first one. The first one is an attempt to prove that there is a first mover or a prime mover unmoved. The second way is an attempt to prove that there is a first efficient cause. Now, those almost mean the same thing, but they don't mean the same thing. A prime mover, I move you if you're already there, and I bump into you and you move. I moved you. But you have to exist already for me to move you around. So the prime mover unmoved would be a thing that moves, set the world in motion. You assume that the world's already here, and something sets it in motion. That thing would be the prime mover. A first cause, in the way he's talking about in the second way, is a different kind of thing altogether. A first cause would make the thing begin to exist in the first place. Now, if you're savvy and you were paying attention, you saw when you read this some vocabulary that we saw in Aristotle on Monday. If you remember the four causes, I want to go back there because that's where the word efficient cause comes from. It comes from Aristotle and his four causes. Aristotle, if you remember, thought that there were four ways to explain what things are. So, if we're asking, did God create the world, and what does it mean to say that God created the world, these are going to be relevant. There's going to be more than one way to do it. One way of explaining a thing is to say what it's made of. That is the material cause of a thing. The material cause of a sword is the metal it's made out of. The material cause of a person is ashes to ashes and flesh and blood. The material cause of God, he's immaterial, etc. So the material cause of a thing is what it's made of. When you're asking for an explanation of the universe, that might be what you need. What is the universe made of? Is everything in it matter, or is there more than matter going on in it? What else could there be? And even in just a creation story, this could work out in more than one way. If you read Genesis 1:1 and you squint, it'll look a little bit like matter was always here, and God, quote, moved across the face of the waters and then started creating the world. I want you to think about that. If the order of that story is right, God moves across matter, water, that was already there, and then starts giving it form, which is the second of our four causes. He starts taking this chaotic matter and making rocks and trees and the sun and the moon and people and animals out of matter that pre-existed. That's what Plato thought God did. Plato believed in God, but didn't think that God created matter. He thought that matter was eternal. So creation might be a matter of taking eternal matter and giving it a form. Or it might mean you create matter itself. And the Bible is ambiguous on that. It kind of looks like he created the world out of pre-existent matter, just like Plato thought. But it's not clear. In the Middle Ages, they decided or determined that God created ex nihilo. Ex nihilo. Ex nihilo means out of nothing. There was nothing but God, and then God made matter, and then he made that matter into the forms we have around us. Who knows what the right answer is, but those are two very different ways of thinking about what creation is. And they are the first two of the four causes. The third cause is the one Aquinas is talking about here. One way of understanding what a thing is to ask who made it. The painting Michelangelo made and the painting you made that looks exactly like it are two very different things. Someone who has the same form as you but wasn't born to your mother is not you. The efficient cause of a thing is where it came from. Or better, it's what made it begin to exist. So your efficient cause is your mother. Your mother's efficient cause is your grandmother, and so on ad infinitum. Or not ad infinitum. This is the one we're going to be talking about, but there are others around it. The fourth way to talk about what something is the final cause of a thing. The final cause of a thing is its purpose. In Greek, it's telos, hence teleological argument that we're going to be getting into in a couple of weeks. We might look at the universe and ask not what made it, but whether it serves any purpose, whether it's here for some reason, whether it's going anywhere ultimately. When we ask that question, and we ask it about God, we're asking this question, not this one. Not where did it come from, but where is it going? Okay? So, all of this Thomas Aquinas work is coming within the philosophical framework of Aristotle and his metaphysics. Now, what does Aquinas have to say about efficient causes? How can we use this to prove the existence of God, or can we? So, back to God. Aquinas. I am on 165, the second way at the bottom of this column. If you've got a different page numbering, find it, and ready, set, go. The second way is based on the notion of an efficient cause. You now know what that means. We find, he says, that among sensible things, meaning we find among the things we see, that there is an ordering of efficient causes. Now, what does that mean? An ordering of efficient causes is a time ordering. It's a before and after. You hit the cue ball with the pool stick. The cue ball hits the 8-ball. The 8-ball goes in the pocket. That is an ordering of causes. The cue moved the ball, moved the other ball, went into the pocket. So, ordering. Your grandmother made your mother, made your sister, made your niece. So what? Where do we go from there? Yet we do not find, he says, nor is it possible to find, anything that is an efficient cause of its own self. Okay. Now we're starting to get into the heart of it. Why not? Why does nothing cause itself? For, he says, that tells you you're about to get the premise for that conclusion. The conclusion is nothing causes itself. I'm going to write that down here. Nothing causes itself. Why not? If something caused itself, then it would be prior to itself. I'll write that down so we can think about it. What does that mean? If something caused itself, then it would be prior to itself. I think he means something straightforwardly like this. If you create yourself, then you have to exist because you're standing there about to make yourself, but you also can't exist yet because you're standing there about to make yourself. And you can't exist yet if you haven't been made. So something creating itself would have to exist and not exist at the same time. So, let's write that out. If something created itself, then it would exist and not exist. Seems right. Well, so what? Well, so what is E and not E is impossible. So nothing creates itself. This is an argument, and it's a good one. This is a good argument. It's valid because if this is true and this is true, this does follow from it. If something created itself, then you would have this consequence, but you can't have that consequence, so you can't have this. And everything in it looks true. We know number two is just a logic rule, that something can be true and false at the same time, something can exist and not exist at the same time, and this looks true. If something created itself, it would do what is impossible. So nothing creates itself. We got a pretty good argument for something here. Is it for God or is it for something else? It's probably for something else. But it's a good argument for something. Nothing can create itself. At this point, you should stop and ask yourself, what about God? Did God create himself? Now, people talk that way. People talk that way about God. God created himself. You know, who created the world? God. Well, who created God? He created himself. René Descartes even said that. And René Descartes was a pretty good thinker most of the time, but he seemed to think that God created himself. Does Aquinas think that? I'll ask you, and I'll give you a second to think about it. No. No, Aquinas doesn't think that God created himself. Well, isn't that weird? Does that mean someone else created God? What do we say? He doesn't think that God created himself, and he doesn't think that someone else created God. So, if he didn't create himself, and no one else created him, who created God? The answer is no one. And the answer has to be no one, for this reason. God is eternal. And if something's eternal, then it cannot have a cause. Might not have a cause, or we don't know what its cause is. If something is eternal, if this is part of what the word God means, then he can have no cause. He can't create himself, and nothing else can create him. Basically because if something has a cause, it's got a beginning, and if it's got a beginning, it's not eternal. So if God is eternal, he's got no cause. Now, before we go into the rest of this argument, he's going to be arguing in this passage that the universe has to have a cause, that it cannot be eternal. And I want you to think about this when you read through that, and as we go through that. Does this create a problem for his argument? If it's possible for things not to have causes, then what is that going to do to his argument? One more little puzzle for you, okay? So Aquinas thinks that nothing causes itself. We've established that, and it looks right. He also thinks God doesn't have a cause, because he can't, because he's eternal, and etc. Now, let's just talk in a common sense way about what the first cause argument is trying to say. If you ask people why they believe in God, you'll get a million different reasons. But one of the most common reasons is the one Aquinas is really talking about here. Of course God exists, because otherwise who made the world? Well, why does the world have to have a creator? Why did it have to have a cause? The answer you'll probably get or give yourself is everything has a cause. Puzzle for you. Does Aquinas think this? I'll give you a second to think about it. Does Aquinas think that everything has a cause? No. Why is the answer no? Because God doesn't have a cause. And if God has no cause, then this cannot be true. And if you notice, he never really says exactly this anywhere in the argument. He's trying to avoid saying this, because it can't be true that everything has a cause. Well, if it doesn't have to be true that everything has a cause, we might wonder why the world has to have one. If things can be uncaused, why can't the world we live in be one of them, the universe? Could it be uncaused? Everything has a cause. Do we think it or not? How does that principle work out? If you think that everything has a cause, and you start with something now, this is a little diagram of something that exists right now, and you ask, what caused it? Well, everything has a cause, so it was caused by something. This made that. And then you ask, does this thing have a cause? Well, yeah, everything does. So this caused that. And then you ask, does this thing have a cause? Yeah, it was caused by that. Can you have a first thing in the series if everything has a cause? You can't. It's funny. The cosmological argument works, the first cause argument anyway, works precisely in reverse from the way most people think it does at first glance. If you think that everything has a cause, you're going to get this series instead. Instead of this leading back to some first thing, everything will have to have something before it, which is going to get you an infinite series of causes. So does everything have a cause? If yes, you have this, not this. If you think that not everything has a cause, there's something uncaused, then you get this one, not this. Kind of counterintuitive, but it's something we're going to want to keep in mind. So what we're about to see is about these two models. These are two models of the world. We start with the world we're in, and we ask, where did it come from? I was born to my mother. My mother was born to my grandmother. My grandmother was born to my great-grandmother, and she was the first thing. Is it like that, or does it go on forever? Okay? Passage 2. So far, in this second way, we've only got one thing set in stone, that nothing can create itself. What else? Back to page 165, this paragraph. The second paragraph of the second way. But it is impossible, he says, to go on to infinity. He's talking about picture 2. He's talking about the bottom. That is impossible. Why? For, he says, in every case of ordered, efficient causes, the first is the cause of the intermediate, and the intermediate is the cause of the last, and this regardless of how many are in the intermediate in so many words. So what is that? That's jargony, but all he's saying is if you look in the world around you, you will find series of causes in order, beginning, middle, and end. Your great-grandmother created your grandmother, who created your mother, who created you, who created your daughter. That cannot go on to infinity. Why not? He says, well, so every series of causes has a beginning, a middle, and an end, a first, an intermediate, and a last. But when a cause is removed, its effect is removed. So if your grandmother didn't exist, you wouldn't exist. Sounds right. If your grandmother didn't exist, then neither would you. Therefore, about in the 7th line, therefore, if there were no first among the efficient causes, then neither would there be a last or an intermediate. If you had no grandmother, you wouldn't exist, again. But if the efficient causes went on to infinity, there would be no first one. And so there couldn't be any middle or last either, which is obviously false, he says. Therefore, one must posit some first efficient cause, which everyone calls God. Okay. Now, let's think about what this means. You could, and you probably did say, Aquinas believes that there has to be a first cause because everything has a cause. But he can't say that. Because if everything has a cause, then there's no first one. The end. So what else can he say instead? Let's look at what he did say. I'll write it out. Every series of causes has a first and a middle and an end. But the first is the one that's operative in this argument. It's the one he's using, so it's the one we want. Every series of causes has a first member. Okay, so then what? If the universe went on infinitely, there would be no first member. Roughly what he says in the next line. If there were no first among the efficient causes, then if the efficient causes went on to infinity, there would be no first one, he says. Therefore, the universe has a first cause. Now, we're going to use that little language I taught you, the language of logic. Is this argument valid? What does it mean for an argument to be valid again? It means that the premises are connected to the conclusion in the right way, such that if they are true, they entail the conclusion. So he says, if the universe goes on infinitely, there'd be no first cause, but there has to be a first cause, so the universe can't go on infinitely. It has a first cause. It is valid. If both premises are true, they do entail this. So, we're halfway to a proof. It's valid. All we need to know now is whether these two things are true. That's kind of a big thing to know. Number 2 is just a mathematical truth. It's obvious. If the universe were infinite, there'd be no first member in it, because infinite things can't have first members. Infinite series can't have beginnings and middles and ends. So 2 is true just logically or mathematically. What about 1? 1 is saying that every series of causes has a first member. I want you to look at it and then look at the conclusion and see how similar they are. Every series of causes has a first member. The universe has a first member. They look almost the same. It's almost like all ravens are black, therefore this raven is black. They aren't the same thing, but if you're trying to prove that this raven is black, saying, well, they all are, is kind of assuming the thing you're trying to prove. This and that are almost the same thing, but they're not, because this has a universal in it. Every one of them. All A are B. Every S has an F. Every series of causes has a first member. This is where this argument lives or dies. I don't want to say this clearly, It's one thing to say that this argument might be right. It might be right. This could be true, and that is true, so this could be true. But if this is going to be a proof, we need to prove this. We need to know the premises. So do we know the premise? Let's ask Aquinas how we know that premise. I want you to go back to the first words of the proof, the very first sentence of the first paragraph under the second way. How do we know this? The second way, he says, is based on the notion of an efficient cause. We find that among sensible things, that means things we see, there is an ordering of efficient causes, and that ordering is first, middle, last. So his proof is that every series we've seen has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Does it? At this point, I want you to think about the causes and effects you've seen in your life. So you see, let's go back to that pool example. You see an arm move, and then you see the pool stick move, and then you see one ball move, and then you see it hit another ball, and then you see it go in the pocket. That is an ordering of inefficient causes with a first member, my arm, and then a final member, it going in the pocket, and then a bunch of stuff in the middle. Now, is that my arm moving first in this sense? The universe has a first cause, means first in a real ultimate way, meaning there's nothing else before it. Did something move my arm? Yeah, my mind did, my brain did. Your grandmother created your mother created you. Is your grandmother the first member of that series? Yes. Is she the first member like God is, or did something make your grandmother? Something made your grandmother, so not every series has an F like this. I want you to think about whether you in fact have ever seen a series with an F like this. Have you ever seen a cause that had no cause? I never have. Have you ever seen something that caused something else that was not itself caused? If not, this might be false, that every series has a first member. It might be that every series we've seen is not ultimately first, it's got something else preceding it. And if that's right, this may be something we don't know, and not knowing it is okay. It's still an interesting argument. Like, what do we do with an argument like this? You might say, we need a proof of line 1. We need a proof of this. We don't have one yet. It'd be weird for it not to be true. It's strange to think about a universe with no beginning. It's easier to think about the universe if we think, okay, it started in 1983 and keeps going. But to prove that it had a beginning, we need some kind of premise. We need some support for it. You can't use everything has a cause as a premise, because that means there would be no God. He's trying to give you a different premise for it, but it's a premise we may or may not know, and it's a premise that sort of is begging the question of the conclusion. The upshot of all this, the first cause argument is a live debate. It's something people are still trying to figure out. Do we know this? Can we prove mathematically or logically or physically somehow that the universe had to have a beginning? And if not, what do we say instead? One of the things we might say instead is what we're going to talk about next time. In your next, when we meet on the 10th, your reading assignment for that day is Samuel Clarke's contingency argument. Now, at the beginning of this, I told you what a contingency argument is. A contingency argument is an argument that we live in a world of things that don't have to be the way they are, and any explanation of why they are the way they are is going to have to end in a being like God. That's the point of a contingency argument. A contingency argument tries to say that we live in a world that requires a God to explain why things are the way they are and not different. And it requires not just any part of God, it requires God's necessity, God's self-explanatory quality or something like that. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about Aquinas is if you look at his conclusion is we must posit, we must suppose, in other words, a first efficient cause, which everyone calls God. Now that's two different things, a first cause and God. What if the first cause is bad or evil? What if the first cause is long gone and doesn't exist anymore, but it was there? What if the first cause lacks some power or doesn't care about us? Do you have any work to do to prove that that first cause is actually God? Aquinas even thinks, yes, this is not supposed to by itself be a proof of God at all. This is from a book, a very long work, called the Summa Theologica. And a big part of the Summa consists in trying to prove that a first cause would have to be God. It would have to have all the other qualities of God. It would have to be good, it'd have to be all-knowing, it'd have to be sovereign over everything, etc., etc. There's a lot more to God than being a first cause, because a first cause by itself could be not godlike, it could be evil or something. So, the kind of being you're going to get in the contingency argument's a little different. It's going to have to be something that has other qualities apart from being a mechanical thing that sets the world in motion. Okay? I want to give you some vocabulary going into your Samuel Clarke reading. Samuel Clarke uses two words that mean very specific things the way he uses them. Dependent and independent. Dependent, independent. A dependent being, a thing that is dependent, is, the way he uses that word, something that needs something else to explain its existence. So you're a dependent being because the fact that you exist is explained by things apart from you. An independent being, if there is any such thing, is going to be something that's not true of. An independent being is something that explains its own existence. Like, take two parallel lines will never meet. That proposition. You think about what parallel lines are, and you ask, will they ever meet? And the answer is no. And somebody asks you, why won't they meet? The answer, you might say, is self-explanatory. If you understand the concept, you'll understand that it must be so. An independent being is something whose very being would be like that. It's something whose existence would be self-explanatory. Mine is not, yours is not. The world's existence seems not to be self-explanatory. So how do we explain it? That's going to be the job that Samuel Clarke tries to give you. So that's it for now. I will see you in class in 8 days, on Thursday of next week. Next week is weird. Thursday is the Monday schedule, and there is no Monday class. So I will see you on Thursday, and otherwise on Mondays from now on. So.